Starlight, star bright, first star I see tonight. I wish I might have the wish I make tonight.
Sometimes the stars are in alignment when it comes to a project or an artistic endeavor. And that's definitely true of Pinocchio.
Pinocchio was not only the apex of the art form, but also that time, that perfect moment when all the people, all the artists, all the musicians were together with a great artistic leader. And that only happens once in a lifetime.
Pinocchio is a unique film because it followed Snow White, and you can see the confidence that the crew had after a huge hit like Snow White. They just rolled up their sleeves and said, let's just see what we can do with the next one.
I think there are lots of reasons why so many people list it as their favorite film. Partly, it is the whole richness of the look of the film. It is just one of the most beautiful films that have ever been made, quite simply.
As ravishing as it is, I think its most glorious achievement is the risk they're taking with story, with theme, and even with character.
Basically, Pinocchio is the ultimate expression of what is possible in the craft of the animated film.
In the history of Disney animation, Pinocchio is a very, very, very important film. It was their second feature. It was the one just after Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And that was a huge, rousing success.
People forget that Snow White was the Titanic of its day. It was a mega blockbuster.
The first feature-length animated film that anyone had ever seen on screen. So what could Disney do better than that?
Bambi, of course, was the one that had the #2 number on it, but Walt wasn't sure of it yet. He didn't know how to make the picture. So he said, well, Pinocchio is one we know how to do.
Pinocchio just seemed to have a really interesting story that offered so many possibilities for things that hadn't been done before in animation.
The original story was written by a journalist and writer who lived in Florence, in Italy. His name was Carlo Lorenzini. He was better known as Carlo Collodi. It began as a serial, rather like Dickens' stories were told, serialized week by week in what was the first journal for children published in Italy. It's a book about mischief, moral and improving stories about what you need to do if you're going to be a really good boy or a really good girl.
I think what remains durable about Pinocchio, certainly the most accessible, is this wild sense of invention and grotesque sense of adventure that Collodi has. But it comes mixed with some of the most cruel and vicious sort of moralizing centered around what it takes for this puppet to earn his right to becoming a real boy.
The moment that the work started on the film, it proved problematical.
We were pretty cocky coming off of Snow White. We thought we could just sit down and do another feature. We start working on sequences that were in the middle of the picture. Walt looked at it and he says, it's not working right.
What has to be remembered is that the character created by Carlo Collodi is essentially a bad boy.
He was brash, he was cocky, he was kind of unlikable. He was a troublemaker. Walt didn't like that as he was shaping up, so he changed him.
Disney began to realize that this little wooden character was really not very sympathetic, partly because he was drawn in the way that he was drawn.
They had started out doing some animation based on model sheets that really showed a Pinocchio that looked like a puppet, like really something that you would carve out of wood, very geometric shapes, very wooden looking. And Walt just didn't care for it. And he said, it just doesn't look alive, and I don't see the appeal.
He was so concerned about it that he actually halted production. Production stopped, and they had to decide what to do, how to take the matter forward.
They were thinking in terms of a puppet all the time, naturally, because he was a puppet. And I was very critical of what they had. So I did a little test scene where Pinocchio had the donkey ears and a tail, and he was down on the sea bottom. And he knocked on the shell of this clam and asked him if he had any idea where he could find Monsieur the whale. And I handled it, not thinking of so much as a puppet as just a little boy. Walt liked it, so that became the model. And it still refined a little bit more later, but the idea.
This is a matter of not just changing the character's design, but changing the character's behavior so that his status as a puppet was minimized.
Pinocchio changed internally by not being cocky or arrogant or being a wise guy. He actually became a really sweet, innocent little boy.
A real boy!
It was around that same time that they decided to use the cricket. The talking cricket in the book shows up once. Pinocchio kills it by throwing a hammer at it because he's annoyed because it's giving him advice. And then it shows up again as a ghost later on.
What Disney saw in this character, and goodness knows this is a testimony to Disney's sheer inventiveness, was that it could contain the kernel of something that might make this story work.
Walt had felt that there was not enough warmth. There's not enough friendship. There's no love in the story, really. So that's where he used Jiminy Cricket.
He ended up being the heart of the story instead of getting squashed with a mallet like he did in the original Collodi version.
This moralizing little character was actually made into a sidekick, a friend, a partner to Pinocchio.
And more he comes to dominate the picture.
Very contemporary American wisecracking character.
Hey, Blubbermouth, open up. I gotta get in there.
And it's that constant humor of Jiminy's and that constant ability to deflate a serious situation, add a little spin,
No more privacy than a goldfish.
or just a little dollop of humor at a moment that might otherwise not be funny, that makes the film work as a whole.
It could be worse. Be cheerful. Like me.
The humor in Pinocchio is just timeless.
Screwball in a corner pocket.
It's just as funny today as it would have been back then. You look at any movie from the 30s, 40s, very few hold up without being a little dated, a little corny. Pinocchio isn't.
Close your eyes. What do you see?
Nothing.
Open them. Now what do you see?
Spots.
A lot of the film has a kind of thread of irony running under it. You know, they had some pretty clever story people and some pretty clever music people working on this. So even though Honest John sings,
Hi-diddly-dee, an actor's life for me.
he's doing it to hoodwink Pinocchio. And that's a sense of irony. Jiminy Cricket has a line which I love after Pinocchio is successful as an actor on the stage.
What does an actor want with a conscience anyway?
The fact of the matter is there's all sorts of these ironies going through it. Stromboli is another great example.
What's this?
He's counting all of his money. He encounters a slug. He starts to curse. He goes,
For you, my little Pinocchio.
like he's bestowing a great gift on him.
For me?
And it's contrasted with Pinocchio's innocence. All of the characters have that kind of richness to them, and the storytelling has that kind of richness to it. I mean, you already know if they're gonna go someplace called Pleasure Island, that's gonna be bad news.
Look at yourself. Smoking. Playing pool. No!
Pinocchio's about temptation. We all are tempted every day. Do we do the right thing or do we do the wrong thing?
Where do you suppose all the kids went to, Lampwick?
No, they're around here somewhere. What do you care?
So we all can watch Pinocchio, whether you're 5 or 55 or 105, and go, I wonder what I would do in that situation. It's so hard to be good.
My nose! What's happened?
Perhaps you haven't been telling the truth, Pinocchio.
On the one hand, Pinocchio is very faithful to the original stories. On the other hand, Disney lightened it up and made it more palatable to an American audience. But it does retain those dark fairy tale origins where really bad things can happen to you if you don't follow the rules or don't have a conscience. Things can go wrong. In order to illustrate that, Disney has to show it to you in all of its horror in some cases.
Most of Walt's early films, as wonderful as they are to look at, definitely had the dark side to them. Snow White and the Queen, you know, asking for Snow White's heart to be brought to her in a box. I mean, how horrific is that?
In Pinocchio, it is heightened to this extraordinary degree because here you have a child A child who is a true innocent. He's a child and a puppet at the same time. He doesn't understand the threat that these sinister characters present to him.